Welcome to the next how to build a video from Railway Laser Lines, and this is a kit based on the Viaduct at St.Pinnock's Liskeard in Cornwall, and these are the parts that will come with the kit, so I'll just run through these with you. Now this will be available in 00 gauge and should be available in O gauge as well, and the templates may come slightly different if we do the O gauge, but obviously this is the Viaduct track base, and it has some engraved lines on one side. It doesn't on the other side. The engraved lines should be faced under, as though it's like a concrete paneling, and this will be the top side where you'll add your track and ballast. We've got the internal side frame. We've also got the outer frame, side frame, and then there's the outer joining side frame, which basically will bond onto the side of this one. You've then got the ballast shoulder plates and the plates that will hold the little tags for the railings, and then you've got your two safety railings. You've got then your frame joiners from one side to the other, 4 of those, and then 2 that go on the end. And then you've got all the small little pieces. These 8 pieces here go in the bottom of the framework in these small holes. So there's a couple of spare ones, and again same with here. These are the notches that go into the tops here, and then this one will go in this one and allow you to thread your railings in. It'll be more self-explanatory as we go along. So those are all the parts. Now obviously most of this kit will build before we actually prime and paint, but you might want to paint the base first. Now although the top part you'll have your ballast and track, it's still worth giving this a prime. MDF prefers to be primed, so I would suggest you prime that side and also this side, and then this will be the underside. So what I'll do is most probably prime it in white, and then I will create sort of like a concrete color and then heavily weather it on there. Now obviously these sections here with the holes are for the side frames. Now there is very little tolerance in margin for any paint going in them, so what I'm going to most probably do is mask up from the holes back and just prime and paint the inner side. It just might be too much paint that goes in there and we can't get them in, but this is a pre-production model, so we can always tailor make that should I find that I struggle. So I will go and prime and paint that. The small pieces here that will allow the safety railings to go in, they're held on by a small tag on the end of each one, just one, so just be careful. And I think what we might need to do is to just give these a quick prime. I'm going to most probably do them with a black primer, so I don't have to do any other colour, and then put them to one side. Everything else we can most probably paint once it's all made together. So everything else we'll put together, I think. I don't think we'll find it. All the railings will need to be painted prior to assembly, and I will most probably do those in an aluminium metal colour of some kind, and then perhaps if time allows do some rusty weathering, but I might do that on the O gauge one as and when that comes up. So those are all the parts, so we'll crack on. Obviously all these templates need to come out, and they're held in by tags. There's little engraved lines so you can see where they're held in. Sharp zippy blade or craft knife, just zip them in there and tag them out and they'll come out. Same with all these pieces, and then obviously we'll start building them. So I'll move all the parts out the way and then we'll start the build. Right, so I didn't do any masking up, I've just tried it without it, and I've primed and allowed that to dry, albeit with the addition of a hair dryer, and then once that was dry, did this side and allowed that to dry with the hairdryer as well. So what I'm going to do is, obviously because this is a kit that we're building slightly different this time, because we'll build it upside down, we need to start from this side. So I need to make sure that this is looking how we want it to be finished, so it's a case of giving it perhaps a concrete effect. So I'm going to find me paints, deck tan and buff, and I'm going to give it the sponge method to try and look like concrete and not get as any paint in the holes if I can try and help it. If I do, I'm just going to get a small paintbrush and just wipe it away and do the best I can, and then obviously we'll add the parts, and obviously if they don't fit, then we'll make these holes slightly wider to allow that when you come to build yours. But fingers crossed we won't need to do that. So we'll start adding some paint and do a concrete effect. I'm not going to go into how I do it. Plenty of other videos out there what we've done. I'll come back and show you once that's been completed, and we're only doing the bottom, we're not going to do the top. And there we have our kind of concrete effect. There's a number of different colours: grey, white, buff and deck tan. Use the sponging method and then gone over hair dry just to dry it quickly. Ideally it needs all weathering etc, but we are pushed for time on the build, so we'll just leave it as it is, and then we'll start adding the parts to it. So that's how we got so far. Let's continue. We will at some point need to mask over all this, because obviously once we add all the framework we'll need to prime and paint that. So obviously we'll be doing that at an angle, so I'll most probably use some paper of some kind just to try and mask up as much as we can. We'll see how we get on doing that. So the first part of the build need is template number 2, and it's engraved in the top left, and these are the inner side frames, so you need to just detag it from the template, and there are engraved lines as to where you need to do it. So it's there and there. Once you've done that with your zippy blade or craft knife, you can just take that away and dispose of that, and then we're left with the 2 frames. Now these 2 frames will be going on the inner hole sections, so this one here and this one here. So we will add a bead of glue, and I'll use a cocktail stick to go along the inner edges of here. We won't be putting on the tops, just need to do it in between the tags, and then slot it into the holes, and then keep it in a 90-degree position if you can until it dries, and then repeat that with this one here. So that's what we'll do next. We'll come back and show you when that's done. So hopefully you've got to that stage and look something like that. Give it a good 5 or 10 minutes for it to dry and bond, and then what we need to do is we need to grab template number 3, which is this one here, which is the 2 end plates, and we'll be tagging these out, and again we've got engraved lines as to where they come out, and then we'll be adding them over the edges on the top of these, and they'll slot into these 2 holes. So these there go in those holes and it will slot over, and then these sections here, the cross braces, will actually, they'll come away. They're not glued, they're not attached to it, they come away, so you can bend them slightly, and then they will go in these holes here. So you'll need to add a bit of glue in here. So the glue will go in the top section there, tiny bit of glue in there, bit of glue there, bit of glue there, and then a bit of glue in the hole. Detag these out and then put them in. A little bit tricky just to get them in, but just make sure that these have bonded and are not going to bow and move anywhere before you add this one. So I'll take these out of the template and add one on, and I'll come back and show you when that's done. So as you can see, it slots in that there and then into the hole, and vice versa. So these now are just protruding at the back, so we need to add a little bit of glue in there, and then you can just bend it and then fix it in, and it will go in there just nicely. You need a little bit of pressure, but it will go in there, and I'll do the same with this end. I'll come back and show you when that's done. So those slotted in those 2 holes, and then all we need to do is replicate exactly the same on the other end. Okay, so we've done both ends, and just remember to wipe away any excess glue around the holes that comes out, because obviously this will show, and then just allow this to dry. We then need to replicate what we've done with the 4 inner cross plates, and these are in this template here, which is plate number 4. Just take them out. The bars go straight across on these rather than at an angle, and obviously you'll see the holes are further down. So it's just slotting them in the holes as we normally did, add some glue into there, and then stick them in, and then just hold them on just to bond into position, allow it to dry, and then move on to the next one. So we'll do all those 4, we'll come back and show you when they're done. And there you have all your cross brace is done, and I'm just going to put that to one side now and allow it to dry for 10 or 15 minutes before we move on to the next section. When we're putting in these cross frames, you need to bond. Obviously, once they're glued in the bottom and at the top, they'll slot in, but obviously they're still loose between here and the inner frame, so you need to run a bead of glue along the inside here and on this side, and then pinch it together and hold it and allow it to bond, so it gives it that little bit more rigidity. And do that with all the 6 along the sides. So now we've allowed that to dry, we're moving on to the next section, which is part number 5, and these are the strengthening frames, and these will go on the outside of the inner frame in these 2 holes here. So horizontal, they'll slot into, you see they've got 2 little tabs there, they'll tab into here, and then you'll also put one on this end, and then we'll turn it around and replicate it on the other side. And it's just adding a piece of glue again, bonding into the sides. Just be careful when you get these out, these are really thin. Again, I've put an engraved line as to where they're held in. Just a small bit of glue on the end of your cocktail stick, run it along, stick it in the side here, and just make sure it's put in, and then we're ready to go on to the next stage. But let's take these out, glue these, come back when it's done. So hopefully yours looks like that. So they're in horizontal. I did add a bit of glue on the ends and then just glued them to the sides, and I've also used my tweezers and I've gone in and just pinched them against the side just to make sure they've bonded on nicely and don't come out. So it's certainly worth having your tweezers to hand. So that's those 4 done. Again, we're going to allow this to dry for a few minutes before we move on to the next section. So moving on, we allow that to dry. This is part number 6 on the template. This is part of the outer frame, so again they need to come out of the template. Just cut them where they're engraved, and they are going to fit into the outer holes. And obviously then you can add some glue obviously to the edges as we did on the inner one, but now we can also add a bead of glue down the end of each of these cross frames and also along the edge of the strengthening frames, and that will give it a much stronger bond. And then obviously we'll replicate that on the other side. So let's crack on and do that. So when gluing this side on and adding it to inner side frames, you do want to make sure that these down parts for the cross supports, you've got them in the middle. You could add some, when you've added them before, you could have had some glue down there to make sure that they're level, so you've got the same amount of gap either side, so they should hide behind these. You don't want them bowing, they might just bow slightly behind, but you can add a bit of glue and make them go vertical before you add these on. But just make sure when you glue this into position, because obviously that's going to bond here, there, that they'll look a little bit weird if they're bent. So just double check. The camera's in focus, just check they're all okay, and then move on to the next side. So we've done one side, and now we'll just do the second side. So when I've turned over on this side, I did notice that these 2 were just slightly bowed, so I just run a bead of glue down the sides and I've just moved them over with my fingers. They should be parallel with where the little notch goes into the center when we put these side pieces in, just here. This should be horizontal and vertical exactly. So all I've done is just bead of glue, sorry about the camera work, it's crap, and then just held with tweezers in place into the center and allowed it to bond slightly to give it a little bit more strength and to be a little bit more straighter up, rather than rely on doing it after you've added the outer frame. So that looks okay. I've allowed that to dry for a few minutes, so now I'll add this frame on and that should all be good now. So it's just making sure obviously that the outer frame is pushed into the slots and glued to the side, and then obviously I turned it upside down, or should it be the right way should I say, and making sure that it's all nice and flat level with the inner frame, which it is. It's not rocking or going anywhere, so that's all done. And obviously then just pinch it and hold it together to bond them, and we'll allow that to dry. and that's coming on now, so we're starting to get the full framework effect. We've got a little bit more to do yet, so we'll continue, but we'll allow that to dry for a good 5 or 10 minutes. So moving on, we've now done the first of the outer frames. We now need to cut this out of the template, and this is part number 7, and these will slot into the remaining holes right up against the outer frame. So we'll be gluing again on the inner edges here in between the tabs and allowing that to go inside there, and then it will rest up against this one. And obviously where we cut this out, we'll have a number of edges at the top, and they'll line up with the top flush of this. And then once that part is dry down here, we can just move each part away and then add a tiny bit of glue behind with a brush, and then we can just use our fingers to pinch it on, making sure it lines up with the top of the model board frame side here. So we'll take those out, add it to the ends, allow it to dry, and then we'll tap it on the end parts. I think there's 4, if memory serves me right, and then that allowed to dry, and then that completes that framework, and we'll repeat it on the other side. And that completes the framework for the sides, and they're bonded on. Again, just tip it upside down, or should I keep saying to the correct way, make sure it's nice and flat, just put a bit of pressure on it, and that's all nice and level. So I'm just going to tip it back up again, and that's going to be allowed to dry, again 10 or 15 minutes before we move on to the next section. Right, so the next part of the build is to grab hold of these. Now there are 2 spare because they are small, and these are the cross struts, and you'll see there's a little indent in there, and they go in these holes here, 1, 2, 3, and obviously replicated over on that side, and they fit in between the 2 frames. So you'll find obviously that part there will slot in there, and then it will rest up against here. Now the ideal, obviously we need to tag them out of the little fret, and you'll put some glue on the inner edges of there and a tiny little bit of glue on here. You're going to need your tweezers, and then you literally grab hold of your tweezers, take it out, and then you'll most probably need to manipulate it at an angle and slot it in at an angle. And once it goes in, you can then move it around, and then I would just use your tweezers just to manipulate it and try and get it as square as possible, obviously using your eye, and then obviously just squeeze these 2 together just to let it bond. It'll only take a few seconds, and then move on to the next one, and that's this one. And then obviously once you've done those 3, you can turn it around and do the other 3. So there are 2 spares just in case you break one or drop one. So let's crack on and do that. We'll come back when that's done. And that's those 3 in this side done, and that's those 3 in that side done. So they should just bond nicely over the next couple of minutes, and then we can move on to the next section. Now the next section is involved number 8 on the template, which is the 2 what are these called, longitudinal beams that will go along the side frame, and also template number 10, which are the little slots. So these need to be tagged out, and they all need to be placed inside these holes. Now this will eventually be glued on here all the way along there, and obviously the slots with these in facing outwards. So you could take these out, slot them in while they're in the template, then take them out and glue them in, or take this out, glue it onto the frame, and then put those in. That's entirely up to you. I think what I'm going to do, because it's in the frame still, I'm going to take these out, glue them in the frames, and then take them out and do that. If I find that doesn't work very well, then I'll let you know at the end. Right, so I added mine while it was still in the fret, and they are fiddly little buggers, so you're going to need your tweezers, and there is a good chance you're going to drop one or break one. There is 1 spare. I think I might end up doing 2 or 3 spare, to be honest, especially if you drop one on a beige carpet like I just did and spent the last 10 minutes looking for the damn thing, only to realise that there was a spare one. Anyway, they're done, so I'm going to let them dry, and then obviously then take them out, and again there's an engraved line as to where they are joined, to trim them out, and then glue it to here on the fascia of the outside frame. So these are facing outwards. I thought about actually painting them first before putting them in, after it's been done on the bridge, but I think in hindsight, I think the best way is how I've done it, is to fit them in, and obviously when we come to spray it, if you want to then go over them and just paint them slightly, you can do, but they're going to match these ones here that hold the railings for the top of the viaduct. So and I'm not quite sure how we're going to solve that one yet, because the railings need to be painted, but we'll approach that as and when we get to that stage. But first of all, let's take this out the fret and add this to the sides of the frame of the viaduct on both sides. So if we now turn the bridge the correct way, that's how that panel should look, fitted right underneath, butted up against the base and aligned with the ends. I put a bead of glue on the actual frame and then got a brush and just brushed it over and then added the side piece to it, and I've done that on both sides as well. So that's that part done. We'll just give that a few minutes to dry. Right, so up until now we've actually made the kit with the bridge upside down. So now we've done the side piece, we now need to make sure the bridge is the correct way around, so the base is facing upwards, and we'll need section 11, which is the ballast holders, or the ballast wall if you want to call it, and then obviously the railing holders, which is number 12. Now I'm going to do exactly the same as what I did with the previous one, is I'm going to cut these out and I'm going to add them into here while they're in the fret, and then take it out, and then these notches will then go into the outer remaining holes. There's a slight hole left from the inner frame, and these will slot into there, and obviously then at some stage we're going to need to add the railings, and the railings will need to be painted prior. Now obviously there is a very small hole for the railings to pop into, and I'm hoping when we come to paint this, I'm not going to put too much paint in here. If I do, then the worst case scenario is I can cut the tabs off the ends of the railings and glue them to the side, which I did on the original build of our test kit, which didn't look wrong, to be honest, but we just thought it would be an easy way to hold the safety railing. So what I'm going to do, cut these out, add them to the fret part, and then take it out and then glue it in place. It all makes sense when you see it, so let's crack on. What I did forget to remember is these number 12 and the previous ones only held on by a small tag on one side, and it's the long side without the notches. So it's just literally putting your blade in the center, pushing in, and they'll drop out. So it's just literally held on one side on the longer side of the item. So we've now added the ballast walls and they're glued in position. You might need to hold them down when you put them in. I might make the tabs just a little bit smaller because I think it's just slightly too big, but just push it down, hold it in position. You can always add a bead of glue with your brush behind it to keep it in position. So that really completes the build, apart from the railings which are over there, and I'm going to need to paint those first, because obviously what we're going to do next for the viaduct is we've got to prime it and paint it. But first, before we do that, I thoroughly recommend with model board is just to give the whole thing just a quick light spray of matte varnish. It bonds to the model board really well and adheres, so when you come to add some primer and paint, I think it gives it a better finish. So tomorrow morning in the first light, can't do it now, it's pitch black, I'm going to give that a quick coat of matte varnish. I'll bring it back indoors and allow it to dry, because obviously the cold weather is not going to help. Once that's dried, then I'll go over it most probably with a grey primer. I might do a white primer yet, but obviously what we have to remember is that although we primed the top, that's fine, we actually painted at the bottom, so we've done that ready in the concrete. So we're going to need to mask that up Now, I wouldn't worry too much about masking it up when you do the matte varnish, but after that, again, we'll need to think about masking it up. So I'll most probably get some paper and just push it around, and then when I come to spray the bridge, I'll hold it down and spray up angles just so it doesn't go in. You're going to bound to get some of it on there, but by the time we've added some weathering and dirt and rust, etc., you might not see it anyway. But that's enough for today, and then tomorrow we'll start with the matte varnish. Allow that to dry for a couple of hours, and then we'll give it a coat of primer. So we'll turn back to the how to build very shortly, in this case, next clip. So we've subsequently matte varnished the Viaduct, allowed it to dry, and then I gave it a quick prime with some grey primer. I then went over the 00 gauge one with a metallic paint, and then went over it with the quick blast of the rust paint. Once that was dried, then I added some track on the top, some ballast, and glued that into position. On the O gauge one, if I just move the 00 one out of the way, this one's more of a rustier colour. I did prime this one, and then I primed it also in black, and then went over it again with a quick blast of grey, and then rust colours. So there's some different colours here and there, but I think that's going to be a paint to your individual spec and taste on that one. And again, added some piece of track, added some ballast, and that's done. So all that remains is to complete the build, is to add the side railings. So whether it's the 00 gauge or the O gauge, we need to add the railings, and there are some narrow holes, hopefully you can see them, which is where the notches of these railings will go in. Now you're going to need to put the smallest amount of glue in this hole, and then offer up the railing and put them in one at a time. And I suggest once you get the first one in, you hold that one in position, and then you move the leg of the railing and put that one in, and then once that one's in, hold that one and carry on along until you physically have done the whole side. You might find that one or two might pop back out again, but this one here isn't even glued in, and I've just notched them in, and it just, you just literally had to put your finger on to keep that one in position while you move that one into the hole. So you could add some glue down there if you wanted to, but I think adding it in the hole is going to be the best bet. So that's our next job, is to do that. If you're doing the 00 gauge kit and you cannot see the holes because you put too much paint, then the other option would be, instead of putting the lugs going in facing inwards, turn it around and have them facing outwards and just glue them to the sides. That's going to be your only option if you can't get them through. And don't put hardly any glue in. That side was a right pig to do. So what I might do is actually fit them in first, and then just add a tiny bit of glue afterwards. I don't think they're going to go anywhere anyway, so just be careful when you do these on the 00 gauge. Right, on this side, instead of adding the glue on the inner side where you actually put the tabs in, I put the glue in the other side. So so once the actual tabs go in there, it'll grab that glue and it'll bond there, and it doesn't stop you from moving it in. So I found that a little bit easier. So this side went in a lot easier by adding the dot of glue on the inner side rather than this side, if that makes sense. And there we have our completed bridge. So we've added the safety railings, added some track, added some ballast, glued it all down, and that's all done. Obviously, when you come to do your track work, you'll need to obviously most probably put an additional base to slot across to what you're bonding this to. Obviously, this is a viaduct, so it'll need to be supported at each end by some kind of pillars or brickwork, and then it might make sense to have an additional piece going across here, which I must probably add to the kit, to be honest, so you can put this over the top onto your baseboard or whatever you're doing, and then add your track and ballast afterwards. But this is just a display product. So that's all done, painted, and all completed. Obviously the O gauge is exactly the same, but that's down in the cabin. So that completes the build. Any questions or queries, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us on our Facebook Messenger or on our website contact form. Thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you again very, very soon, no doubt. Bye bye.